Right, I'm at 10 o'clock, so let's get going. So thanks for joining me again for another Sprinkler Talk. This is episode 37, and today doing something completely different. So we've not done this before at Project Fire. We're doing your questions answered. So it was an opportunity for all people that have listened to Sprinkler Talk to send in questions for me to answer. Kind of put me on the spot. So yeah, thanks for all those that sent in some questions. I've actually got quite a lot of questions, so there's quite a lot to get through today. Just have to see how the time goes. If time kind of runs away with us, then I might sort of pause it and say that I'll do the rest of the questions another time. But like I say, we'll just see how we go. So yeah, just a quick introduction again. So my name's Andy, and I work for Project Fire Products Limited. We're based in Staffordshire, and we sell innovative and sustainable products for the automatic fire sprinkler industry. Some of the products do feature on Sprinkler Talk from time to time, but say that this is really an educational platform to discuss the benefits of sprinklers and best practice of sprinklers. How can we make them as efficient, as effective as possible? How can we look after them, service them, maintain them, so that sprinklers continue to provide the excellent track record that they have in terms of being effective at containing, controlling, suppressing and extinguishing fires here in the UK and obviously all around the world as well. Okay, so let's get on with then the first question on today's Sprinkler Talk. As always, do give me a message in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that. If there's any sort of questions that come up from what I'm about to tell you. Here we go. Come on, move. Okay, here we go. So, how do you know if the sprinkler system has been installed to the correct standard? So that's, I guess, a question from the point of view of the sprinkler system that's already been installed. And maybe you are an inspector, maybe you are sort of taking over responsibility of the sprinkler system. Maybe you're the building owner, and again, you've bought a building that already has a sprinkler system. Then you just want to know, what am I getting here? Is this a decent sprinkler system? Is it up to standard? So the answer I would say to that question is really a case of, is it an appropriate standard? So for me, there's no such thing as the correct standard. It just depends on what you're looking for. As we've discussed in the past, Sprinkler Talk is very much based in the UK, and therefore I'll be talking about LPCB rules and BS EN 12845 as kind of the reference point. So it is highly likely that your sprinkler system will be installed according to that standard. But say there are other code standards around, NFPA, for example, code standards, and then FM have got their own rules. There's VDS in Germany. So, like I say, having the correct standard, well, really, I'll just be asking, is it an appropriate standard? What I mean by that is that you're not using a standard that is not designed for the application that you're doing. So, for example, if you're running a factory where you're producing electronic goods, and your sprinkler system has been installed to 9251, then that is not an appropriate standard, because 9251 is for residential and domestic use. So, as long as the standard that you're using, covers the area in which you're working in, then it's an appropriate standard. Is it kind of the one that you want? Maybe not. Like I say, maybe it's some sort of European standard that's been used, and you wanted it to be LPCB compliant. Then maybe there's going to be a little bit of changing over, sort of a few tweaks to bring it up to that new standard. But yeah, really, for me, it's just a case of, is it an appropriate standard that's been used? I think we've talked about this in the past, where there is no requirement to bring the system up to the latest specifications. So, for example, if your sprinkler system was from the 1980s, then it would have been installed to a different code standard. Trying to think what it was now. Was it 5306? Yeah, 5306, I think, was the previous British standard for sprinkler systems. So obviously now we have 12845. So there's no requirement to bring that up to 12845 standards. But again, if the building is going through a period of change, change of ownership or being refurbished, then obviously I would recommend that be done as a matter of course to kind of overhaul the sprinkler system and bring it up to the latest standards, which they probably wouldn't be a great deal of cost to that. Because the pipe and the actual distribution would be okay. You might want to change the sprinkler heads, but really it's going to be down to the insulation control valves and the water storage that may need to be adjusted. Life safety as well. So again, if your sprinkler system is being used for life safety, does the code standard kind of back that up as far as being appropriate? Next question. Who is responsible if the system doesn't work? What if the company is no longer open to fix the problems? So this is a question about responsibility. So the first question to ask is, what's the sprinkler system for? Is it there for property protection or is it for life safety? What's it being relied on to do? So you may have instances where the sprinkler system was installed because the building owner wanted it. So it wasn't a requirement. The building owner just thought, yeah, this is the right thing to do, or maybe the building owner, likes gadgets and thought, they put a sprinkler system in place. So if that sprinkler system is now, fallen into ill repair, it's not working properly anymore, then maybe that's okay. If it's not actually being mentioned as part of the insurance, property protection, if it's not sort of listed on those kind of documents as part of, this is part of the fire safety of this building, then really, it in a way, it doesn't matter. If that sprinkler system isn't actually being relied upon to operate reliably and effectively, then it doesn't have to be maintained. Clearly, I think it should, and I think it'd be worth the money to bring it back up to scratch. But where the sprinkler system is being mentioned, say as far as the fire safety of the building, you've got your safety file, and you say, we've got a sprinkler system here, and we're relying on that either for property protection or for life safety. Then, of course, it has to work. Otherwise, you're basically making it worse. You're saying the building's safe because you've got a sprinkler system. Well, if you haven't got a sprinkler system because it's not working properly, then arguably the building is in a worse state than it would be before. If you knew you didn't have a sprinkler system, then you might be looking at other means to improve it. Responsibility is basically down to the building owner. And so the consequences will depend on the function. So if it's an insurance job, then the consequences of not maintaining that sprinkler system might be that your insurer gives you a slap on the wrist, or your insurer doesn't cover you in the event of a fire. So that's going to be a financial penalty. If it's for life safety and you don't keep it in good working order, if there's a fire and there's injuries or there's even deaths, then of course that will come with a different set of consequences, which could result in imprisonment and kind of very, very severe punishments. So building owner is the short answer. They can of course deputise that responsibility to someone that's kind of in the building on a day-to-day basis. But then, of course, the building owner needs to make sure that they've got the right information, they've got the right tools, they've got a budget, they've got all the things that they need in order to actually do that job correctly. The building owner can't just sort of sneak it on them and then run away. They've got to obviously make sure that is they are doing their job correctly. Okay, moving on. Do I have to use LPCB approved components for the sprinkler system? I mean, the short answer is no. I mean, it does depend on what you want. Like I say, it is quite common in the UK for a sprinkler system to be specified as being LPCB compliant, or even to have what's called an LPC 1048 Certificate of Conformity, or COC. So if that's been specified, then obviously, you know, part of getting that sign off, that certificate, is using LPCB approved equipment. If you just want the sprinkler system to be installed to the British standard, then there's no requirement to use any particular approved components. The British, any kind of code standard will not refer to particular manufacturers or particular approval bodies. You know, they are completely independent. All they will say is that the equipment needs to be appropriate or fit for purpose. You know, you can't just use any old thing kind of lying around. It has to be good quality, you know, decent equipment that you're using. But there's no requirement to use any particular approved equipment. Similarly, if you're using residential or domestic code standards, then again, you know, that kind of approval comes into place as well. So if you are, say, going down the route of LPC approval, then you must be using LPCB approved equipment where available. Okay, so not everything is available. For example, there isn't LPCB approved pipe. Pipe is pipe, as long as it conforms to, let's get this right now, is it EN 10255? Which is the standard for, you know, pipe thickness and diameter, pipe specifications. So it's obviously very useful for it to conform to that standard. But so yeah, there isn't LPCB approved equipment for everything, but where there is, then that should be used. Oh, a little note there. But we're going to do that a bit more in Sprinkler Talk 40. We're going to be looking at approvals in a bit more detail. Question on fire crews tapping into the water supply to increase the duration of the system. So yeah, there is something called a fire brigade inlet. That's not mentioned in the code standards as a requirement in any circumstance, as far as I'm aware, but it does appear on some of the water supply diagrams. So yeah, it's an option. It's a nice to have. For me, you know, it's a good thing. The fire and rescue service, when they arrive on site, they're obviously going to have a look at what the fire's doing, how it's spreading, how the sprinkler system has tackled it so far. So they've got some options there. And if they want to, they can boost the duration of the sprinkler system by feeding into the inlet. If it's a reduced capacity tank, then even more so. That'll be very useful to do so. Although this is totally my opinion, by the way, this is not in the code standards at all, but in my opinion, the Fire and Rescue Service can use the water storage tank to actually take water out and use it where they see fit. You know, in my head, you know, they're the experts. You know, they're on site. So if they choose to use that water for a different purpose, to kind of use on their hoses, then I would say go for it. Next question about diesel pumps. So obviously diesel pumps run off fuel. We need to make sure that there is fuel available to that diesel pump in order for it to run. That's kind of a no-brainer, really. But the question is, do we need additional fuel storage over and above the required storage in the fuel tank? So let's just have a little look at that. So both BSEN 12845 and TB210 both give a time. So they don't give a quantity of fuel, because obviously that depends on the actual engine itself. Kind of how thirsty the engine is will depend on how much fuel is required. So they haven't given a figure in litres, they've given a figure in time. So for light hazard, we need 3 hours of fuel. ordinary hazard, we need 4 hours of fuel, and for high hazard, we need 6 hours of fuel. So already we have surplus fuel. I think it's fair to say, because for ordinary hazard, remember the duration of the sprinkler system is only 60 minutes. So for ordinary hazard, we've already effectively got 4 times the amount of fuel that we are likely to need for that sprinkler system. So already we say we've got a kind of backup supply. And also fuel levels are checked every week. So the kind of short answer to the question again is no. You do not need additional fuel storage on site, but it is checked every week, and you should be running that diesel pump every week. So if your fuel tank is only big enough, let's say you're in an ordinary hazard building and your fuel tank is only big enough to just get 4 hours of fuel in it, then you've got a problem, because every time you run that pump, the level is going to drop down, and then you're going to need to top it up again. So I think I'm right in saying that for most diesel actual fuel tanks are actually bigger than this. They're kind of 8 hours worth of fuel, and I guess that's just because it's just convenience. You don't have to keep topping it up every week. You've got yourself again a buffer over the required standards. I hope I'm kind of making this clear. So yeah, that's what the standards say you need on site at any time, which say is already a surplus of fuel over the duration of the sprinkler system. But it obviously is good to have even more than that, so that you're not having to top it up very regularly. Requirements for backup electrical supplies. So yeah, in some cases, yes, you would need backup electrical supplies. Under the domestic and residential standards, it is there as an option, and where there's an option, generally people don't do it, of course. Fire signals always should be protected. So fire signals should not be relying on mains electricity to get those signals through. Obviously, they're very important. And it's not such a big deal to have a battery on your panel. So, I can't think of any panel that won't have a battery backup on it for that very purpose. The kind of main panels I'm talking about. So they have a battery on there so that when the mains power goes down, they've still got that communication. Backups for electrical pumps are only required if you've got 2 electric pumps. So generally speaking, electrical backups for fire pumps are not required. If you've got 1 electric pump, then that's fine. Okay, if that is deemed suitable, a single supply, obviously. So yeah, one tank, 1 pump. You've got a single supply. That's deemed fine. If you're under life safety, then you would need a backup pump, but you could, of course, have a diesel pump. So again, the idea is that 1 electrical failure is not going to completely render the sprinkler system inoperable. So if the mains electricity goes down, you've still got your signals, and the electrical pump won't run, but the diesel pump will, and kind of come to the rescue. If you're using 2 electric pumps, then again, you don't necessarily need electrical backup supplies as long as you can take the electric from 2 different sources. So 2 different substations are, I guess, it's not my area. But yeah, if you can say, 1 failure of main supply isn't going to knock out both pumps, then you can do it that way. But if they're both coming from the same supply, then yes, you would need the kind of generators, switch panels, etc., to make sure that 1 electrical failure is not going to knock out both pumps. How am I doing for time? Okay, I admit that I planted this question in there so I can talk about ZoneCheck. How much water does ZoneCheck save in a year? Do you know what? I've just realised that, of course, I haven't actually done that. So let's get my calculator ready. I don't make a fool of myself. So it's around, when I say around 300 litres, to say I realise I've messed this up already, that isn't actually the answer. The answer is around 1,200 litres per year. I realise I kind of missed a step on there. So it's around 300 litres per test. Okay, so remember, zone check is testing flow switches. If you don't have a zone check installed, then you would need to use manual methods, and that means opening the test line to discharge water to actually test your flow switch. So the amount of water that zone check saves, so zone check uses no water. So really the question is, how much does it save in comparison to manual methods? And in order to work that out, it is, obviously it involves a calculation, and it involves some figures, which, we don't necessarily know. So first of all, we need to know the time it takes to actually, how long are you discharging water for is the first question. Okay, so how long is the valve in the open position? Obviously that will depend. It'll depend on the time delay on the flow switch. The flow switches have got a time delay. In the UK, it's 0 to 30 seconds. In other countries, it could be up to 60 seconds. It'll also be based on how quickly you can get the signal from that flow switch. So often that requires a phone call or a walkie-talkie over to, another part of the building, where you'll be kind of ringing through and say, signal been received? Yes. Yeah, okay, I've got the signal. So that's going to take a bit of time. And then also, it's a case of, well, how quick is the engineer going to be? Are they having to climb ladders, climb down ladders, so make the call? Is there signal within that area? So all of that makes a time delay in terms of how long the valve is in the open position for. So we're going to say 60 seconds in this instance, which I think is very fair. It could be a lot longer. It also depends on the size of the test valve. So how big is the opening in which the water's coming out? Remember, that is measured in K factor. Now the test line should be sized for one sprinkler head in operation. So if you've got K80 sprinkler heads, there should be a K80 orifice on that test outlet. If you've got K115s, it should be a 115. If you've got 160s, it should be 160. So again, we're just going to take an average. Ordinary hazard sprinkler systems might have 115 heads on them. So we could use that. But yeah, 160 is the biggest, so we can use that figure as well. And then it also depends on the pressure. So obviously the higher the pressure, the more water is going to be discharged. And that is found in this equation Q, which is the flow rate, equals the K factor times the square root of the pressure. So to get a nice, easy calculation, let's say we're going to use K160 as our K factor. The pressure will go for 4 bar, because the square root of 4 is 2, so that's nice and easy. So it's 160 times 2 is 320 litres per test. And obviously the test has to be completed at least 4 times a year. So we can times that up. We can do 320 times 4, 1,280 litres. And obviously that will also be times by the number of flow switches or number of zones that you have in the installation. So yeah, it can add up to a very large quantity of water very quickly. So yeah, that's how zone check saves water. Next question: do I have to have a water motor alarm gong? Well, yeah, sort of. In the BS standard, so I'm going to read here from 16.1.1 of 12845. It says each control valve set shall be provided with a water motor alarm in accordance with EN 12259 part 4. Okay, so it is there in black and white in terms of you will have a water motor alarm gong. So that's why they're fitted. If you've forgotten what a water motor alarm gong is, there's more detail in Sprinkler Talk 8, where I kind of go through different types of alarm valves, and the water motor alarm gong is mentioned there. It's a water-powered bell. In honesty, it's not very useful these days. We're basically going to ignore it. We're going to be taking digital signals instead. So it is becoming more common to not fit a water motor alarm gong, which is obviously fine as long as all parties are kind of signed off and happy that they're not going to be installed. As with anything, anything is possible. You don't have to follow the standards. You don't have to follow the technical bulletins, as long as all parties are kind of agreed that this is an appropriate course of action, and sort of everyone's kind of clear on that point. Okay, next question. How do I switch a sprinkler system off when attending a sprinkler activation? Well, really, all you need to do is close the main sprinkler stop valve. And this should be clearly signed. So actually in the British Standard itself, there is instructions on where the sign should be located, what colour it is, what size it is, what size each of the letters are. It should be clearly marked in terms of where the stop valve is. So a bit like when you're at home and you find there's water over the floor because a pipe's burst or the washing machine's failed or something, then you would run to your stopcock, your stop tap in your house, and you'll be turning that off. Same for a sprinkler system. If you've got water coming out of your sprinkler system, say maybe a damaged pipe, if there's a fire, of course, then you should not be turning it off, because you're basically not qualified to make that decision as far as is the fire completely out. Fire and Rescue Service will do that. Let's say that the pipe's been damaged and there's water coming out. You want to turn it off. You turn it off at the main stop valve, simple as that. The fire pump, if there is one present, that will be running, and that will be running against what's now called a closed head. Okay, so because you've closed that stop valve, and that main stop valve, by the way, is going to be at the installation control valve, then the fire pump won't like that long term. The fire pump is there to run to destruction. So once you've turned the close the stop valve, that fire pump is it's going to keep going for a while. Okay, so it won't going to blow up immediately, but it won't like that long term. So ideally, we then want to switch the fire pump off. But that's kind of a bonus, really. If you want to stop the sprinklers, turn the stop valve, and then call the sprinkler contractor. So should be the sprinkler contractors or servicing contractors' phone number up in the pump room. So give them a call and they can advise some further from there. Okay, I don't know how many questions I've got left. How can you check servicing records for a sprinkler system? Really, just need to ask for them. Again, how should it be serviced is another question. And again, it should be serviced in accordance with the standard that it was installed to. So code standards will have a section on service and maintenance, and that is the minimum. Okay, all the time we're talking about minimum. So I mentioned earlier about flow switches being tested quarterly. That's minimum. Okay, they can be tested more than that. And the servicing and maintenance requirements under the British Standard, again, that is a minimum, not a kind of a recommendation. It is a minimum that need to be done. So again, whatever standard it's been installed to, there will be requirements of how to service and maintain it. So that would be a good place to start. Can you kind of tick these off? Ask to see evidence that they've been conducted in that manner. And say it's simple as that, really. If the building can't provide evidence, then there should be a record book being kept, and that is a requirement to have that record book and to keep it up to date. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there because we've done kind of half an hour now. So we'll do. I do have some more questions. We'll go through those another time. I might tag them on to a different session. I might do a brand new session with some more questions another time. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there for the moment. But yeah, thanks for sending in the questions. Thank you that there are so many. And yeah, we'll make sure I'll do the rest another time. Let me skip to the end there. Yeah, thanks very much for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Next week, we're talking about BIM, building information modeling, and how that can be used in automatic fire sprinkler systems. So yeah, do tune in and listen to that one. All right, thanks a lot. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.